Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Sammy Sebok. Coach Sebok is the owner of Iron Saints Athletic System in West Logan, West Virginia. Coach Sebok is an accomplished powerlifter who was inducted in the National Athlete Strength Association Hall of Fame in 2020 and was Athlete of the Year and Lifetime Achievement winner in 2021. His best lifts were an 804 squat, a 622 bench, and a 667 deadlift. He played football at Fairmont State and after graduation started training athletes. He juggles life as a preacher, coach, and PT assistant. In the physical therapy realm, he was heavily involved with creating return-to-play metrics for ACL injury. So welcome to the show, Coach.
Thanks for having me on. Glad to do it.
Well, yeah, I don't know. We somehow got to be friends on Instagram, and then that turned into a few conversations, and then now here we are.
Yeah. I kind of came on interviewing some of the people I associate with. I started watching your stuff, following each other, and seeing you took your kids to the one of the NASA meets. I thought that was pretty cool to see someone that I knew, competing in the organization that I've always competed in.
Now, I mean, I have tons of questions, so we'll just see where this thing ends up. But I know you spend a lot of your time powerlifting. You enjoy powerlifting, but then you also coach athletes. So you hear it said a lot, we're building athletes, not powerlifters. But why do so many powerlifters have a knack for creating athletes?
I think it's just one of those things that most of us kind of found it from being an athlete. I didn't start out competing in powerlifting. The guy who trained me and helped me whenever I was in high school, I got there to train for football, and he'd played football. But he was powerlifting. He's like, if you ever want to compete, you can compete as well. Well, being a competitive athlete and, young male, of course, I want to see how strong I am compared to other people. So my senior year, I played a game Friday night, and we packed up Saturday morning, and I went and did my first meet, like a bench only meet, the day after a game. And that is something you hear all the time. That's something that I've kind of struggled with, because people have this negative association that with powerlifting and athletics, and I don't know why they think this, but they think that I want to train my athletes like they're powerlifters. I'm like, I'm going to go find a bunch of powerlifters, doing sprints and doing jumps and all the things that I have my athletes doing. Everybody uses squat, bench for deadlift, but for some reason, when you're a powerlifter and you use those, it somehow gets this negative stigma with it.
Well, and the powerlifting focuses on a 1 rep max, but to build that 1 rep max, I feel like a powerlifter has to navigate so many different styles between VBT, between bodybuilding, between dynamic work. All of those things go into building a really good max. And it seems like all those things also transfer over very well to athletes.
Absolutely. And I've said before, like there's this, for some reason, there's this negative association, but I'm like, you have people all the time who are training kids who maybe they know their sport, but they don't know anything about the weight room. But we never give a second thought, not even a pause, of them, just blindly training kids with no knowledge of what they're doing. I'm like, you could take a lot of powerlifters, even if they maybe didn't know as much about the athletic side, especially a conjugate-based powerlifter who understands the importance of intent moving the bar and how to drive up strength and good technique and form, and probably take an athlete a lot further just by letting them run the weight room than someone who had no clue at all what they were doing.
I think all strength coaches have this in common, but powerlifters definitely. There is such a huge fixation on the numbers. Where do you think that comes from?
I guess it's just, everybody wants their kids to be strong. People who love strength training, they want to see those numbers rise. And I try to, you got to know your own biases. So I try to stay away from that. I try to tell my kids, like, it doesn't matter as long as you continue to improve. Like if the number goes up and we're not getting better in the way that we need to, it doesn't really matter. And, that's a fight a lot of times with the young guys first starting out. Well, let me put more weight on there. Let me put more weight on there. And I'm like, you can't do the movement right right now, even though it's light. So let's learn to do the movement, and then it'll be easy to load you later. But everybody sees Instagram and these highlight clips and the 1% of the 1% of these crazy strength numbers, and I guess everybody they want to chase that.
So I kind of set all this up to kind of get into some questions on coefficients and determining weak spots. Me and you've talked about this a little bit this week leading into it. Tucker C sent me his Google Sheets for sprint, tracking sprints. And as I'm going through them, man, there's just so many ideas that you could take off of his Google Sheets to create a lifting sheet in my mind that would work for me. So understanding coefficients and what should be there to produce an athlete. How do you look at that?
I try to use for squat, I kind of look at it as like what I base off of, acceleration and vertical. And then I usually use deadlift more like the hinge type movement, especially sumo for, their broad jump and their top end speed. It's not where it needs to be. And I try to push that up. And then of course, if they're, a throwing athlete of some sort or, baseball, softball, they have something that they're doing that correlate that the bench press has been shown to improve. And I try to drive that up for that. But I kind of use those correlations as metrics that we look at as, if that's what they need to improve. It's, well, you're not accelerating enough. You have good top end speed, but you're not getting there fast enough. We need to squat more.
Now, a deadlift coefficient, how closely do you see that resemble a broad jump? If your deadlift coefficient is going up, is your broad jump distance going to increase?
Typically, and then if it doesn't, then we usually look at increasing the 45-degree back extension. And of late, we've just added in prioritizing the broad jump more, just getting more actual reps of broad jump. And if we're having a deadlift as our main movement that day, then we try to broad jump first. And then on our squat day, we try to, do the vertical jump first, got to prioritize that, that pattern for the day. Because a lot of times before in the past, we broad jump second or in the middle of the workout, pairing it with something, and it would go up, but sometimes people would get stuck or have more difficulty, and so we tried putting that at the front of it and trying to find some more creative ways to give them resistance and contrasts so that they get a little bit more experience and just actually broad jumping. You got to get those kids trust that they can really throw themselves out there and land that broad jump.
Now, we had discussed earlier in the week the power index. How much do you watch what's going on there, body weight and vertical jump?
Actually, when you brought that up, I hadn't looked at it for a little bit. We did follow it there kind of closely. If I had someone who was doing shot put or discus or something like that, then I would definitely watch it a lot more. But right now, the majority of my people are more, just traditional court and field type sports. And so I just focus more on them with their, their speed, their vertical, their change of direction, stuff like that. But if I had someone who was going to throw, I would definitely be looking at that more often.
Now, I wonder, and me and you touched on this just a little bit, but could you throw a Barry Ross metric power index in there and then add the deadlift to that, and then you would possibly be able to see mass specific force on top of an increased vertical? How would that look?
I don't know. That's something to have to play around with. It'd be interesting for sure. I'm waiting on Bird to send me some of his numbers from some of his kids. If you look at his girls, Some of his girls, are deadlifting 3 times their body weight, and I've seen it in person. They sprint. Man, it's impressive. Some of those girls are going 20, 21 miles an hour, and you get people down and on the deadlift. Anybody can make a tool and use it poorly, but if you use it right, man, it just seems like all these people that have that big deadlift, they can really hammer it whenever they take off and get the top end speed.
Now, what do you prioritize for jumps? Is it a box jump? Is it a straight vertical? Is it a loaded jump? What are you looking at to build a vertical?
With my beginners, we try to build strength first and get a base of strength. We do our lift first, and then we sprint, and we just keep it very basic and contrast like a weighted jump and a normal jump. And then as my kids progress and become more advanced, we will do weighted jumps, but we'll also do depth jumps. That's when we start to add in a lot more broad jumps and different types of jumps like that. We typically keep some kind of contrast in there, whether it be weighted, a depth jump, or an approach jump. We kind of try to start mixing all those things in there, and we try to keep it more specific to the day. So our max day, our heavy day, we're going to keep it as like a straight loaded vertical, contrast. And then our speed day, that's when we're going to add in more things like approaches, depth jumps, and some different things like that.
So you kind of touched on it there a minute ago, and I'm kind of back around to it, but like your average male is running a 5.5, 5.4 40, not blazing fast, but, getting the job done with a 24-inch vertical. Should we be looking more at the average for what we deal with in the NFL combine numbers? It seems like we want to compare everything to the most elite athletes in the world when we're not dealing with elite athletes on a day-to-day basis. Should we be comparing things more to the average?
I think so. If that's who we're dealing with, if you're dealing with guys who are, getting ready to go to a pro day or the combine, sure, look at, their position. But I try to tell my kids when they come in, especially if they're in high school, if they've ran a hand time and they tell me what it is, and I'm kind of looking at them and I'm thinking that's not going to be where they're at, or even if they, they do look like they're going to be pretty fast, while me watching them warm up and stuff. I just tell them what the average is, from the get go. I tell them, have you been timed? Is it a hand time? This is the average discrepancy of that. And then sometimes, they'll be upset and they're like, man, that's slow. I'm like, no, that's average. You're average, and that's not bad. Like, that's why you're here is to get better. Like, if we don't know where you are, then how do we know if you're getting better or not? Don't worry about where you're at. Let's just worry about where you can go.
Obviously, especially boys, they want to put on that size. They want to gain that weight. But too much weight gain with too much absolute strength creates a slow athlete. Would you kind of agree with that?
Absolutely. And I tell them that because, some of they want to put on a bunch of muscle, and I tell them like from the start, like if you're going to get every 1 pound you gain, we need to gain 2 pounds of strength. It's fine to gain muscle, but we have to gain, the strength to go with it. So, it's hard to get most of the teenagers. I'm just glad if they eat. So many times during the day they come in, and by the time school, they're like, "Oh, I haven't ate today." I'm like, "Well, why? Well, I forgot, or I didn't like what was there." So most of the time for me, that it's not a problem them gaining too much weight too fast. But if I do have a kid that's looking to gain, I try to make sure to let them know, like, let's do it slowly so that you don't outrun, how fast you're gaining strength. But most of the time, a young kid's going to gain strength really fast. But you do have athletes that get caught up in wanting to bodybuild and do all this other stuff. And I think they don't realize sometimes how much that hurts their athletic performance. If aesthetically they look better and they put on 25 pounds of muscle, but they didn't improve their strength any, well, then you got slower. You got relatively weaker.
Improving your rate of force development in young athletes. Looking at your Instagram, you're dealing with some pretty young athletes. Looking at the pictures, you have a good mix, but you've got some pretty young guys in there. How do you go about improving their rate of force development?
Yeah, we got over the last year or two, like our average age decreased a lot. We had some very successful high school athletes, and as they moved on, I kind of thought that the kids right under them would come, but it wasn't. It was the young kids who were watching them who ended up coming. And there's like this, window of like motor learning from like 8 to 12 years old that I think that we miss out on all the time because there's this emphasis on skill development versus physical development. And these kids adapt so quickly that if they just get in there and they're sprinting and they're jumping and they're, doing something to get stronger, it's like that just kind of falls in the line. But, if they've been there, I have some kids who have been there, a couple years when they're only 11 or 12 years old, but, their training age is old enough and they're strong enough where I'll throw the rep one on there and on, certain days and tell them, okay, this is the speed we want. And you'd be amazed at how effective it is even for a young kid, like how quickly they learn how to put effort into the bar when they get to see a number. And I think it's underused because, we think about that as something that's being advanced, that we do it for more advanced athletes, but I think it's really beneficial for young kids and it's a good way to monitor, if their strength is progressing without really having to load the bar up a whole lot.
You feel like those younger kids maybe need more tangible numbers than an older kid who can maybe see performance on a field where maybe a younger kid needs to see a number?
I feel like all the athletes nowadays need that number. I had a group of guys the other day, a mix of like middle school and early high school, and they were all doing like speed squats. And, we're not doing like speed per se of like the 0.8 meters per second. We try to go more for like the 0.6 of improving it over the month time for whatever variation that we're on. But they were kind of not really, they were trying to move it fast. When I emphasized to them like to spot each other, encourage each other, change each other's weight, call each other's number, and they had someone there holding them accountable for the number they were putting up. With 2 to 3 sets, all of a sudden they went up 30 pounds what they could move. And it just seems to me like athletes nowadays just respond so much better to having a number and seeing an output immediately. It just changes immediately what you're going to get from them.
So are you working off of a meter per second number, or are you working off a percentage of a 1 rep max, or are you kind of mixing them? How do you do that?
When I first started out and we didn't have anything, we would work a percentage. And I feel like for kids or even for raw power, this is something that we've done, is, typically you see like 50 to 60% is what was recommended. And especially with, raw power lifters, like even if they were strong, especially if they're strong, actually, like I saw, like they just did better at 40 to 50%. And so that's what I did with my kids when they were young. And finally got to the point where I was, we were going to do like some dynamic work versus just some repetition type work. We would try to keep them that. But now what we do is the first week, we'll try to hit both, reps at 0.7 meters per second. The second week, we'll try to hit both reps at 0.6 meters per second. And then the last week, we'll try to hit just one rep at 0.6 meters per second. So if they hit those goals, then they add weight. And then we look at the back at the last time. And, I kind of tell them like, this is a max at this speed. So last time that we did this variation, whether it's straight weight or against a little bit of band tension with the straight bar or the safety bar, you got up to moving this at 0.7 meters per second. Try to get up to higher than that this day. And then by the end of the month, we're trying to beat whatever that they got, one of the two reps at 0.6 meters per second. More times than not, they're going to beat that by 10 to 30 pounds by the end of the month.
So if they're above 0.6 meters per second, you look at adding weight, or do you look at adding accommodating resistance?
Well, we rotate. So we'll do like a month wave of safety bar, and then a month wave of straight bar with no resistance. And then we'll go through it again with a band or chain.
Now, are you running free squats, you running box squats, or are you intermixing that? How are you setting that up?
For speed day, we stick with a fun box squat. And then on their max effort days, they will have a free squat in there sometimes. It's like I run about a 2-to-1.
And that makes sense. It seems like if you get too far away from that free squat, their hips get lost. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, especially with young kids, like if they only box squat, they get really good at the box squat, but they kind of lose that ability to free squat. Personally, I don't, care if they're not going to be tested on it, or it's not something that they care about. But I do think it's important for building muscle and, their balance and ability to control their body. So I do try to keep it in there. And for most of the kids, most of the football programs are going to test a kid's free squat versus a box squat. So I try to keep it in there frequently enough so that they don't lose the ability to go and express their strength in front of their coaches. For my beginners, we use a box squat. It's a great teaching tool, but then afterwards, a lot of times I'll have them do like a pause goblet squat as like a secondary exercise so that they, get to learn that motion and then feel that motion without the box and learn to control their body.
And it seems like if you leave the squat out too long, they get sore. So if like they're in football season and their strength coach at school or whatever has them free squat, well, then they're sore Friday night for the game. So I kind of ran into that some this year. I don't know if that's something you've ever noticed or not.
Yeah, it seems to me, and I've heard other people say that you just get more sore in general from a free squat. Versus you can't relax as much. You're not able to relax and sit and try to explode up. You have to control that and keep that muscular tension the entire time through the movement. So it does typically make my guys more sore the week that we do that.
Gravity, it doesn't care how big you are, how small you are. It only cares about the force you can produce to overcome it. So evaluating all of these numbers, how do you decide where a kid needs the improvement? If their vertical isn't going up, but their deadlift's big, where do you start looking for weak spots?
Well, first I'll watch the vertical themselves. A lot of kids nowadays, they have really stiff ankles. And so if you watch them and they roll up on, as soon as they start to drop, they roll up and their heels come up. Well, then their ankles might be just tight. That soleus is tight, the ankle's tight, calf. And so they just can't load their whole foot. It's like flipping a pyramid on its top. They're trying to jump off like a small portion of their foot. So I'll watch that first and make sure there's not something. Sometimes kids get in the habit of they just don't want to bend their knees. Or, maybe they're slow. If their drop is slow, then they might need some more eccentric strength. You might need to have them do some, isometric holds in the bottom, some static started, verticals out of the bottom, or some depth jumps. You got to look at, I like to look at the vertical itself when they're actually performing it to see if it gives me clues as to what is going on there that it's not letting it go up. Because if, like you said, if the strength's going up and other numbers that we want aren't, then there's something wrong somewhere along the way.
Now, starting to get into the foot, I was reading an article that you were featured in, and it was talking about how you had changed your squat a little bit and you had got more foot focused and gripping better and getting stronger in your toes. How much carryover did you see from that?
I saw pretty good carryover. One of the things You always hear about rooting the foot and engaging the hip. And the way I was looking at it, it was like, I was engaging my hips to create pressure in my feet. And I changed it as if I was rooting my feet to engage my hips. And so the biggest difference I saw is when I did that, and I started from the floor down, like trying to root my feet, torque my feet to the floor, and allow that to engage my hips. It allowed me to open my knees better. It allowed me to be more balanced, and I felt stronger out of the hole. And whenever I was doing my video myself, like watching my form, it actually it allowed me to hit depth fast. So I'm squatting to the same box height, but I'm looking at it, and the position changed a little bit where it looks like I'm 1-2 inches deeper by doing that because of the way that my hips were able to open up and move.
I had a chance to talk to Cal Dietz, and it's been a while back. And then he started getting into, it was the first time I'd really went down that rabbit hole, but talking about the big toe and how it affects the way everything fires. I started changing that in my deadlift and my squat, trying to see how it would work. And I kind of stumbled upon that. So then when I saw that in the interview you had, I figured I would definitely ask about it and see how much difference it made for you.
Yeah, I feel like it makes a big difference, and I feel like it's an underrated thing for athletes. I seen a thing a while back. It was talking about, well, NBA players, their feet look like this, and they still do all this. And I'm like, yeah, but what could they maybe do if they actually took care of their feet? Like I see people, doing physical therapy. I work in long-term care now, and I'm like, I know what their feet are going to look like. If they look like that now, that big toe's going to be all the way across the other toes, and the foot's going to be shut down. And just because they're an elite athlete, they can do these amazing things with their feet being bad. Doesn't mean that we should just ignore taking care of our feet. That's the main thing that's contacting the ground all the time. And if you look at, our footwear nowadays, toe box is really small, usually a thick, cushiony, sole that we're standing on, the heel's kind of elevated. And then you watch these kids, like I said, try to drop down into a vertical, and immediately their heels come up. They don't have no base, but and a lot of times what I see is that too, because that ankle's stiff, they can't get the knee forward, and so the quad's actually weak as well. And then you start looking at all that, and you look at all the injuries that we have nowadays. I think it's undervalued. I think getting your athletes barefoot, and we include foot warm ups to strengthen like the arch of the foot and work on a little bit of balance as an everyday warm up.
Getting your younger athletes and athletes in general, getting them to understand that. How do you prioritize that where they start latching onto that idea like you want them to?
Well, typically, if it's a real issue for them, then I'll give them specific work for it. I had a kid a while back, and it was one of those things like we just talked about. He's getting stronger, but the vertical's not going up like it should. And it's kind of inconsistent. One day or one vertical variation we do pretty good, then the next time you're expecting, because this was good, the other one to jump up, and it doesn't. So I start watching him closely, and his ankle mobility is terrible. And so I told him, like, listen, every day we're going to temper your calves before you start your workout, and then we're going to go through these stretches. So we did that, and in like a 3-week period, all of a sudden his vertical jumped up like 3 inches. And so once you do that with a couple kids, and you point out to the other kids, like, hey, this is, look at this. This is what happened because we took care of it. So then they're like, well, am I okay? Do I need that? And I just feel like that's the best way to get bang. Once you take a kid and you show them what addressing an individual weakness can do, then the other kids will watch me. Am I okay? Do I need this? Can you watch me on that?
Now, we touched on it a minute ago, and you were talking about it in your own squat, a better eccentric. What do you like to see? Are you looking for a fast eccentric, or are you looking for slow eccentrics? Are you mixing it up? What are you looking for?
For my kids who are, out of that beginner group, and I try to tell them to go as fast as they can on the way down and be able to control it. Like, I don't want them just to collapse and flop on the box and not have, like, round over and collapse their chest, not have any tightness, but I don't want them to go down super slow. My beginners, I just kind of let them go down at whatever pace they're comfortable with, and I tell them after they have to try to stand up fast. But once we get to it where we're actually, they've been there training long enough that we're measuring bar speed, I kind of try to explain to them, like, the faster you are on the way down, the more potential you have for speed on the way up. And you need to look at this like attacking it like you would something in your sport. You're not going to be going slow. You need to have speed with strength with speed.
Yeah, and I was digging through super training the other day and kind of stumbled on that where they started talking about compensatory acceleration for the eccentric side and intent to get down into the bottom of your squat or whatever it may be, bench press as fast as possible under control to reverse it.
Yeah, and it comes to a point to where, like, especially sometimes when you first introduce like accommodating resistance, like the kid almost wants to fight it, and they're just wearing themselves out. And if there was some of the studies they did, it might have been in super training. I know some of Louis' stuff was in some of the issues that were updated, talking about like the combination methods of bands with the squat, like when they compared how fast they were able to do it with the bands and without the bands. It was like the increase in eccentric speed was matched concentrically when they came back up with them. So, whenever you're going down fast, it prepares that muscle, like it primes it to pop you right back up.
And I know he got deep in the Golgi tendon, and going down fast, you bypass that, and then you're able to handle more and shoot up quicker also.
Yeah, that Golgi tendon, is there to protect us from going too fast, stretching too much, overstretching, try to prevent us from being injured. So it's almost like you have to train it to let it understand this is okay. I can move this fast and I'm safe. And the body works with that in a lot of ways. If you read about the speed barrier, it's the same thing. You get used to running a certain speed, and your brain thinks, well, I'm safe to go this fast. I can't go faster. If I go faster, I'm going to fall. And you have to do something to break that and allow yourself to run faster so that you will get faster.
The one thing I see in a lot of my athletes, and maybe it's the same across the board, is incredibly weak lower backs.
Yeah.
How will you go about strengthening a young athlete's lower back, and what kind of increases do you see when that does strengthen up?
Man, this is something that I've talked about this for a while, and then over the last couple of years, and then I see like Zach Avanesh actually come out with like an article talking about it, like the de-evolution of an athlete. And, back in the day, I could bring an athlete in and immediately put them on a straight bar or put a barbell in their back, and let them lift, and they can hold that posture. Now they can't do that. Like, they can't even squat down with just body weight most of the time without their back rounded very back. And so our beginners, I usually teach them the McGill Big Three when they first come in, just to teach them how to kind of brace and just to give them a little bit of added, ab and back work at the very beginning. A beginner is probably going to, get a little bit from that. I know, more advanced people aren't going to make progress from that, but I just want them to feel what it feels like to brace, to create stiffness. And then we start them out with like goblet squat. That way that they have to be able to squat with a 45 pound dumbbell and hold it in front of them and maintain that upright posture before I'm going to put a 45 pound bar on their back. If they can hold it and maintain it out in front of them like that, I know that they're going to be able to do it once it's on their back. And then on top of that, we work on doing weighted back extension, like on a 45-degree hyper. And I teach them, your back's not lifting you. Your back is maintaining your position. Push your toe down, squeeze your glutes, squeeze your hamstring. Lift yourself with this lower half of your body and hold your position with your back. And then we do demo deadlifts to teach them the hinge. And it's one of those things where I'm like, I show it to them, explain it to them, and I tell them, like, we're not going to go up and weight. You're going to progress this by being able to hold your position and go down further. When you can go down further and hold your back position, then you're stronger. And I think that's important. It's just to teach them how to hinge, teach them how to hold their positions, do a lot of abs, lying leg raises, standing abs on like a lat pull down, and things like that, just to try to build them up in those trunk muscles before we really load them.
So in talking about that, how long will you keep them away from a safety squat bar, or what are the metrics to get them under a safety squat bar? I mean, because that's gonna staple a kid with a weak back really quickly.
They do not use a safety squat bar until I feel like that they are ready to progress to our intermediate group. So the beginners will start out with like that goblet squat. Once they're able to hold that goblet squat in those positions, we start with a bar. And I always start the kids. I always say I start at a key light, where they can breeze through, their 5 sets of 5 for that day in that beginner group. And tell me like it when they're first starting out, well, that was too light. Well, that's okay. We're going to add 10 pounds next week. We're going to add 10 pounds the week after that. When they finally get to a point to where they're strong enough, where that starts to get really hard and their legs are getting tired, and I can feel it, they're actually strong enough for it to start affecting their sprints and their jumps because their legs are tired. Then I'll start playing around with waving their weights on that day and kind of prepare them to start handling a little bit more in preparation for swinging them up to that group. And then once I swing them up to that group, they're usually able to use the safety bar, no issue.
Do you ever use the Lighten method with younger athletes?
I have in the past. Whenever I was in here in my garage when I first started out, and we didn't have as much. That was one of the things that we did as the kids got stronger and they weren't doing a goblet squat anymore, and they were able to do a squat with a bar. And once they got up and they were kind of strong, some of them started struggling. I didn't want to necessarily advance them, to other advanced things, and we didn't have multiple safety bars and other things to use yet. So there became one day they would do a 5 sets of 5 straight weight and a 5 sets of 5 with like a Lighten method, just with some micros, just to let them get a different feeling and get comfortable with having a little bit heavier weight, and that they could take it down and get it back up and be confident in accelerating it.
How much does confidence play a role in the Lighten method? Do you think it's the bands that create it, or do you think the confidence that they see the weight on the bar and actually get it up?
I think it's twofold. I think they have confidence because the band is there, that they will get it up. And then I think after they have done it and they've seen what kind of weight that they handle, they're more confident the next time that they go to do a weight without it. I think just at some point in the Lighten method, it's still going to be max effort. Once it gets so heavy, all of a sudden you're like, where did those bands go? This was really easy a minute ago. But it still lets them strain and be confident in taking a weight down at the kind of speed that they should take it down, that they don't, defeat themselves before they start. And they're able to take it down and get it back up and really, really strain. And then I feel like the next time they're like, well, I did that for the bands. I can get more now without them.
Where I kind of saw the benefit from it was I won't wear knee wraps until me. But you can put the bands on Lighten method and get that same carryover and kind of know where the bands are going to have you at for the meet. I don't know if you wear bands wraps all the time, or if you just use them for a meet, but that's kind of where I seem to use it the most for me personally.
I definitely think that's a sound strategy. Now, typically, what we'll do is if we're doing a free squat, like as far as my powerlifters, my athletes, I don't be knee wraps with them. But if unless they're actually going to go to a meet and want to, but for my powerlifters, when we do free squat for our max effort, and typically, unless we're just decided that day we're only all using sleeves, then we will on the weeks that we do a free squat, we'll wrap, and then if we're doing a box squat, we never wrap. But it's still one of those things where sometimes we'll do like a reverse band box squat, and I feel like it's a very similar outcome to what you would do like a free squat with wraps in a lot of ways. I feel like it gives you a good idea of where you should be at like that.
Yeah, I don't know where I stumbled across that, but somewhere I'd made the correlation, and then I could go without wraps longer and then benefit from the carryover is what I have in my mind. It's going to be the same regardless. That's just how I program it out.
Yeah, I do feel like it, getting that overload in that way without the support of the wraps can be beneficial strength-wise when you go back to the wraps for sure.
You have a pretty good relationship with your local high school coaches. Reading some articles and stuff like that, you've paired with some local teams and help with training. How did that relationship get built?
Man, it's not easy, and there's still places that aren't particularly fond of me for whatever reason. But it's one of those things where just being around and helping and seeing what my athletes have done. Iron Saints has only been in business for 4 years, but I've trained athletes for almost 20 years. So like with Chapmanville, for instance, the guy who's the head coach there now, the very first time I ever got brought in down there after I had moved to this area, he had just graduated from there and was a college player, and was in and seen me, working and helping the team. And then, I've been brought back one other time, and he come back and he was on the coaching staff. And he brought me in for summer, and now he's, the head coach. So it's just like one of these things that's just developed over time. And then, some of the other coaches have just seen what my athletes have done. They played against my athletes. Some of them coached my athletes and then moved on to other teams. And it just seems like in West Virginia, here of late, there's just more people seeking out better strength training for their athletes. Coaches who know that they have athletes who could do something to go into the next level, know that they need more, and they don't care to ask someone for help. Versus in years past, a lot of times I've seen people who they just, I don't know if they just rather be wrong and do it their way, or didn't know that they didn't know, but they were not going to ask for outside help no matter what.
And out on the podcast, I try to run a good balance. I get to talk to a lot of high school coaches. I get to talk to a lot of private guys. And, there is a divide there. Everybody's trying to do the same thing. Everybody's trying on both sides to help these kids become better athletes. And I don't know if one day that divide closes in certain areas or if it's always going to be there.
I hope it won't always be there. I mean, if it is, then it's the kids that lose. The teams that I've done, that I've came in and helped, gotten really good results. Like most of the time, like their kids average taking like about a quarter of a second off their 40. I worked with Nitro here lately. Their football team's a little over an hour away from me, but they had kids improving like 17 to 20 inches on their broad jump. Going up 8 inches on their vertical. I mean, why would you not want that for your kids? Whether it's, just getting, some help in a better structured program for your team, or allowing a kid to come in as an individual. The team setting has limitations. No matter how good the training is, it still has limitations on how much time that those guys have to spend with their kid and how individualized they can get with their kid. And I don't have those limitations. So, you know, I'm going to send you a better athlete. I think I think that the divide is only there if we make it be there. You know, the kids know whether, their teammate is working hard and legitimately out there bettering themselves. And I don't think they're going to have a problem with that unless they're taught to.
Now, in that same article I was reading, I thought this was pretty funny because I had stepped back and looked at it, but as a product of the 80s, the cartoons and movies and everything we watched, we were inundated with strength and hero type. Oh, I guess more of a hero type figure to look up to. How much do you think that molded the way we see life?
I think it was huge. And when I had my first, I call them my OGs, like my first 3 kids that I took here in the garage, whenever this the whole thing kind of really took off. You know, I would ask them, I'd make a reference to something or ask them, and they wouldn't understand it. They wouldn't know what I was talking about. Like, you've never watched this? And they're like, no. I'm like, well, that's your homework. You have to watch this. And I just think that's just something that's lost nowadays in a bad way. Like, say what you will, but I just think there was something great about, the way that we grew up in the 80s and the figures that we looked up to. It was good to be strong. Like, being strong meant that you got to be the good guy. You got to help people, that you got to do something great. And I don't think it's looked at like that now. Maybe it's, someone will make fun of me for that or whatever, but there was, with He-Man and G.I. Joe and Rocky or anything else that you wanted to take back to that time, there was usually a really actually good moral story that was tied to it and tied with being strong enough to help people.
I can remember being little and having just stacks of Rambo coloring books. That was just part of it. Justice League and Super Friends and all those things were on TV for us to watch that helped shape maybe the way we see the world now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the cartoons and the movies of the day are a disservice to our kids.
Well, you talked about traveling an hour away to help, some other teams. If you want to succeed at anything, you have to make time. You have to figure out a way to fit it in. With everything you do, how hard does it get to juggle all this?
Man, it's so hard. I was feeling bad earlier today. I didn't open the facility, but I had a girl who's like a daughter to me, who had her senior night. Man, I can't miss this. Can't miss this. I came home. I went to sleep. I got up. I went there. I helped one of my buddies train down here before the podcast, and now here we are. And I've just always looked at things like, if it's important to you, then you'll make time for it. If you want to know what's important to people, look what they sacrifice their time to do. And that's just something that I've always done. Like, from the time that I started strength training, it was important to me. I always found a way to get it in. Whenever I was, right now my plan is not to compete anymore. I'm really focused on my athletes. But whenever I was competing, if we have revival that week, well, that means on, Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday, when I would normally be lifting and I have revival, that means I got to get up at 4 or 5 a.m. and go drive an hour to the gym, because at that time I didn't have a gym at my house. We were, the Iron Saints gym was at my in-laws, and so go drive an hour, train 2 hours before work, run to work, work all day, and then go to revival, because I didn't want to do a disservice to to God for all that He's done for me and put my lifting ahead of that. But at the same time, if I'm going to the meet don't care that I had revival during prep. The bar doesn't care. The weights don't care. So, I didn't want to, miss out on that either. I tell my kids all the time, that when they talk about wanting to go to college, you better be able to juggle it all. Start living your life now the way that you want, what you want. Because when you go to college and you're tired after practice, if you're supposed to lift after practice, you're still going to have to do it. If you're tired after practice, you're still going to have to do your homework. Or guess what? You're going to be in study hall, and it's not going to be your parents telling you to do it. It's your coach that's going to tell you to do it, and it's going to be assigned to you. You're not going to have a choice. If you want to do these certain things, it's like Nick Saban said, it takes what it takes. You're just going to have to find a way to do it. And I know everybody's busy, but if it's important to you, you just got to find a way to do it.
Well, getting into some of that a little deeper, you were talking about revival. So whenever you're called to do something, it's kind of funny how the stuff shows up. The athletes show up, the weights show up, the rack shows up, whatever it is you need eventually finds a way of showing up. How has that kind of played out in your life?
Man, all of it has been led from that path from the very beginning. So like and it was funny because this Easter, my father-in-law got up and he was talking about how he got saved, and I got to stand and give my testimony as it matters what you do because it affects others. And so if he doesn't get saved, then maybe I don't get saved. Because the way I met my wife is they brought me in to train her younger brother. And at that time, I'm not a saved man. I had went to church when I was younger, but I was definitely not at that time. I was not living my life in a Christian manner. I was not saved. I was not following Christ. And so it's also the first time in my life I'd ever been depressed. Literally a few weeks before that, I just kind of prayed and was like, hadn't prayed or spoke to God in forever. I was like, show me what to do. I can't keep doing what I'm doing. Show me what to do. And it was to the point to where I was either going to move and leave the area completely from where I'm at, or I didn't know. I didn't have another plan. That was my only plan. So I'm like, show me what to do. And so all of a sudden, I'm placed in this family who are all Christians, who do go to church, and they start inviting me to the church, and I'm enjoying, training her brother-in-law, Zach, and he's like the first athlete I trained when I was back from college in my own hometown, who was outside of the original group of kids that was my brother and the kids that were still involved from before whenever I went to college. And so all of a sudden, me and Brittany are start going out from that. And from there, they make us, as my father-in-law sees me, start other people kind of starting to like come to us for help. Well, they build like a garage gym. And that was like the first Iron Saints gym. That's how we became our names, because my brother-in-law was a preacher too. He was called at a very young age. And so that was the name that we came up with. And so then from, without that, there's not this. From that, and we moved, we get married, we moved to Logan. I trained my first kid here, and very successful with him. I kind of caught up in competing. I hadn't trained any kids for a while, and he comes to me and he's like, "Hey, I got this kid, and he's great. You'll love him. I promise he'll do good. You got to take him. I'm moving. I can't keep training him. You have to take him." I'm like, I don't know. I don't know. And he keeps on. So I finally take him. And, he was right about it. And I start training him. And then the next thing I know, I have a business. And so, it's just one of those things. Like, I just feel like sometimes it's hard. And I call it, walking in my calling. I feel like this is what I was called to do. And so if you're walking in your calling, you're always going to be successful. And sometimes you might not see it right away. Sometimes you might not even understand the way that you're impacting someone. But if you're walking in your calling, then just living your life is going to be a witness. You're going to be successful in the long term.
And that success doesn't always come financially. And that's sometimes hard for people to understand. But when you find what it is you're supposed to do, the money is secondary to the joy of doing what you're asked to do.
Oh, absolutely. My taxes make sure of that. But yeah, then a while back, a kid who I had trained, he makes a post about how uh, God had affected his life and how his journey in high school brought him into my facility, and what a impact I had on him, and how that helped lead him to Christ. Man, that's invaluable right there. And there's been other kids that his parents have told me like that, that they see me in this light that I know has to be God, because I'm not trying to beat them over the head with theology while they're in there. Sometimes discussions come up, and I welcome that opportunity. But for this particular kid, what she told her mom was like that I was just this great godly man, and she can tell, and she just, all these things that she told me that kind of really hit me hard, and she just gathered all that from just interacting with me, just being there and in the environment. And I just think that's an invaluable part of our culture that we offer.
Right. So you mix those two things together. You mix your calling and you mix the strength community idea. Why is it that those two communities coming together are so quick to do so much for free, or as close to free as possible? You don't see a lot of that in other walks of life where people just give away their talents. But I'm sure you've trained a lot of kids for free or very, very little money. I know a lot of guys out there do it. What makes that happen?
Yeah, basically, everyone I train, like people, now will be like, oh, he's doing that for the money or this or that. And I train kids for free for almost 20 years. Like, you don't have no idea what you're talking about. There's still kids I train for free. There's still kids I train for next to nothing. I just ain't going to go out there and tell everybody about it, because that's not my purpose. God didn't call me to do that to go advertise, but he called me to do that because that person needed it. And I just think with both that and both with the strength community and like the physical development side of things, like when you have something great that's impacted your life in such a huge way, you want to give it to somebody else. And I got to charge people, because without that, I can't reach anybody on the scale that I am right now. But for so many years, and still, it's whenever God tells me to, there's people that I do that for free because they need it, and I know that it can impact their life. And it's the same way with what if you had to go to a church where you had to pay like $5,000 to get saved? Well, who's going to go there? You know what I mean? Salvation is free. It's a gift. So that's why we want to share it with people. And strength training changed my life in such a great way with John Cooper, who trained me. It made such a huge difference for me and the path that my life took by what he was able to give me just through his knowledge of training and the way that it changed me. And so that's why I've always sought out other people to get that too. That was like his one thing, was he always told me, it was like, be better than me and make someone else better than you.
Now, talking about some of these influences, you've got to go into some of the best gyms in the nation with some of the best powerlifting strength coaches that have ever lived. We were talking about earlier this week, you got to go to Westside when Louis was still alive. You went to Pacifico's gym and you got to work with them, a few others. Getting to form a relationship with people of that caliber, how did that change the way you viewed strength and conditioning?
I think it's great. There's all this arguing on the internet a lot of times within the strength community, but I feel like when you actually go to an event or you go to someone's gym, that's not what happens. Like almost, anywhere that you go, no matter what set we call it that you go to, they welcome you with open arms, and they want to help you. Like if you're willing to travel and seek them out, more the times than not, then they want to help And, at the time I went to West Side, I had reach out. There was a Russian guy named Dimitri who was lifting there at the time. And he was doing my training. And I was going to be going to Ohio. And so I asked him about being able to train there for a visit. And I got to go. And he was there. Louis was there. Jason Coker was there. I don't know if you're familiar with Jason Coker, but world record holder in the bench. And he was like the main guy who jumped in and was coaching me and telling me stuff. And wasn't like I asked him to. That's just he just jumped in and started telling me, you need to do this and you need to do that. And Louis was letting him do it. And Louis very quietly would just tell my wife, you need to tell him this too. He wouldn't even interrupt his guys who were working with me to tell me, because he was letting them coach. And then he's telling my wife on the side quietly, we'll tell him to do this too. And then, I go to Pacifica's gym, same thing, I'm on vacation. Again, find a way, right? Make time. And I was supposed to have a bench shirt session that weekend for a meet that was coming up. And so I didn't want to miss that. So I, drive a little ways out of the way from where we're at on vacation and to go to his gym. His crew spots me, handles me, gives me advice on what to do. And the changes that he made within my workout, we still use as our part of our prep for our powerlifters to this day. And that was years and years ago. If they're going to be in a shirt, and it made a big difference in how well that my results came in my shirt. And same thing on vacation in Florida. While we're going to be in Orlando, I'm going to Orlando Barbell. Let me message Brian Schwab, who doesn't know me, and ask him if I can lift at his gym. And he tells me yes. And I message Joe Jordan, who doesn't know me. He's like, awesome, I'll make sure I'm there and let's lift together. Same thing with people who have messaged me like and asked me like, yeah, come down and lift with us. We'll help you.
That was way back when I was, really studying everybody and trying to figure out what style I wanted to go to and how I wanted to help athletes. I watched a podcast with Matt Winning and George Halbert, and listening to George Halbert talk about the bench press and the things they did was very eye-opening into all the things I had no clue about. So being able to go to those gyms, being able to ask the questions you want to ask has to create an environment where you could really pull in a lot of information.
Oh, absolutely. When I went to West Side at the time, I compete single ply, and of course they're multi-ply guys. But I had a best bench in me of 562. I did 567 that day off of one board, and I left there feeling like I had never bench pressed before in my life. I left there feeling like I had no clue at all what I was doing. But I got a lot better from being there. They're like, your back's weak. You don't know how to use your back. You need to do this and you need to do that. And, just all these little things that, if I would never stepped out of my comfort zone, if I'd have never left, this area around here where my form was, better than almost anybody that I'm going to interact with, then I don't learn that stuff. And that's stuff that was like glaringly bad to them, but no one else had ever picked up on. And if you don't go and lift with someone who's stronger and better than you, I just feel like sometimes you're not going to figure those things out. You got to be able to go and jump in that bigger pond, so to speak, sometimes, and have somebody that's stronger and more knowledgeable than you look at you if you're going to figure out where you need to go.
And you talked about it there before we started this conversation, the different sects or denominations, whatever you want to call it, of strength and conditioning. You get comfortable in your group and you don't want to leave to see what somebody else has to offer. You're just quick to brush it off and be like, well, they don't do what we do, so whatever. There's a lot to learn from some of these other groups as you travel around and see what they have to offer, because sometimes what you see on the surface isn't always what they're doing.
Oh, absolutely. You hear the guys at West Side talk, well, no one's doing West Side but the guys who were there. And just like there'll be people around here that will claim that I do this or I do that. And I'm like, you've never been to my gym. You've never watched a session. You don't have anybody that you know that's personally trained there. So how do you know what I do or what I don't do? You just know what you've heard, or you know what you've seen a couple videos of. You got to really go somewhere and give things a try. And it's like I remember when the kind of fallout and divide started with when Raw. I'm old enough to remember before there was a Raw powerlifting. When Raw came to be, and there started being kind of this fallout between Raw and equipped guys and the training methods from West Side and all this stuff. Box squat, that don't work if you're a raw lifter. I mean, speed bench, that don't work if you're a raw lifter. I'm sitting there thinking, I'm glad no one told me while I was putting hundreds of pounds on my list raw that this didn't work. At the time when I first started out, I didn't know what a bench shirt or a squat suit was. Whenever I first started being trained and I was using these methods, I'd never even seen one until I went to a meet for the first time. But I know that I, put on 100 pounds on my bench press in 3 or 4 months. I know that I put on a few hundred pounds on my squat in a few months. So I just think, people too often they look at what other people are doing. In that moment, they don't understand how they got there, and they don't understand how they're utilizing that tool. And so they dismiss it, or they try to use it themselves, and they apply it very poorly in a way that is not what they need. And so that then they try to discredit it.
Well, and that's the plan, I think, for us this coming year is the more coaches I get to know and build a relationship with has opened up some doors. So this summer, we've got a few destinations we're going to go to and see what some of these gyms are offering. I mean, on the surface, we don't do the same thing, but obviously there's benefit in what they're doing. So to go there and see what they do and how they interact, I think could really be beneficial for my athletes, plus me as somebody trying to coach.
It absolutely will. I'm planning on visiting more places this summer. I got to go and visit Brandon up at Brandon Bird at his place, and man, it was eye-opening because I did his certification because I felt like that's what I needed to do to get my athletes better. And we're going to end up going backwards here for a minute because talking about conjugate, you got to train your weaknesses, right? Well, I knew my weakness as a coach because of the way the kids had evolved was top end speed. Back when I trained my first athlete years and years and years ago, if we got them stronger, we did some resistance sprinting, and we did jumping, they got faster. There was never an issue with that not correlating the top end speed. And maybe that's because I had a smaller amount of athletes, but I kind of feel like it was because the lifestyles that we led back then and the way things were done. Kids nowadays, what we consider like a playground activity, they can't do that. Like kids can't come in and jump rope. They don't have natural rhythm to like skip and bound and pop and do jumping jacks or push up. Like there's just all these things that we take for granted. A lot of times they can't do that. And so, when we did our training, they just always got faster. And then fast forward now, I started training these kids, and their acceleration is great because they've played acceleration heavy based sports their whole life. But then some of them are hitting the numbers you expect based off of that 20-yard sprint. Because we look at the 20-yard as like our indicator. It's like the best indicator for the 40. And then some of them are way off. So I'm like, what is going on here? Well, it's obviously the last 20 yards. And so I reach out to Brandon about one of my kids, and he's telling me these things. I'm like, I don't know what he's talking about. I'm like, I'm just going to take his certification. I need to learn it because he has, all these kids who jump incredible stuff and run incredible stuff. And so I took his certification. I bought Jared's jump book. And when me and Burke talked, we had very, very similar ideas and ways that we did things strength-wise. But the way that he approached jumping and sprinting was he was so knowledgeable. And so I started applying that. But then when I actually went to his gym and I saw how he applied it, having knowledge is one thing. Knowing how to apply it is another. That's like the art form of coaching, right? It's like taking this knowledge that maybe everybody has, but having then seen this unique way and understanding of how to apply it. Whenever I saw the way that he did it, I'm like, okay, this makes sense. Like, you're doing this because of this, all right? And he's like, yeah, that's actually a really good observation. That's really a really good idea. There was, some things like it was like he was doing it instinctively without even necessarily really thinking of it. And so I bring it back and I apply. It's like one of those things to where it was a struggle to get a kid to run 20 miles an hour. Now I have an 11-year-old that runs 21 miles. It was a struggle to get people over 30. Now I have a girl that can't start. And so I've talked to Jared a few times. That's one of the places I plan on, visiting. I've tried to a couple of times and the dates just work out, but I think it's an invaluable thing. Before the internet, that was how you learned, right? You went and visited places. And I just think that there's something that you miss if you don't do that.
And you only get one crack at this thing, right? You don't want to be old and looking over all your athletes thinking, well, if I just would have went here, I just would have went there, maybe I could have helped them a little bit more.
Man, I still deal with that, even though I do it. I look back now and I'm like, knowing what I know now and having what I have now, what could this, and this of athletes have done? Because I know now, looking back, like, oh, we needed to do this with them. They needed this. If I would have gave them this, how much further would they have went? Like, it would have probably been crazy. And it's not that they weren't getting good results, but, it keeps me up at night, like thinking, if we go and we test, we're going to be testing 40s here in a couple of weeks. Well, if everybody gets better except one kid, then I'm going to be laying in bed like, why did this one kid not get faster? And looking back, it's seeing these great results we're getting now. Like, man, I wish I could rewind the clock and bring all these kids back and give them an opportunity to get what I learned now.
Yeah, but without that, you wouldn't be where you are now because you'd quit looking. There's a good possibility that you're just like, well, look, I've helped create this. There's no reason to look any further. You need something that keeps driving you to find the next level.
Yeah, and that's one of the guys I have who's a college football player. He's told me multiple times that's one of the reasons he came to me and that he likes training with me is because he's like, you could have stopped. He said it'd be real easy for you to be like, look at the results we've gotten and not think to do anything else. He's like, but you're always trying to look and trying to add something new. I just, if there's a better way, I want the better way.
There's so many people out there doing such incredible things that just to venture out and meet new people, that's a lot of it in itself.
Yeah, and you also get to see and try things that without the risk, the financial risk. You know what I mean? So I'm looking, when I went to Bird, I was like, he had a Kaiser calf machine. He's got a 1080. He has all these cool things that I'd love to have that, you can, if you go to somewhere and you see these things and you see how they work, you can kind of be like, okay, this one's going to be in the future. This one's going to be right now, or, anywhere in between. You get experience with those kind of things too. Not only the person, but the tools that they have at their disposal that maybe you don't.
Or if you're somewhat creative, you find a way to replicate that until you can afford it. A 45-degree hyperextension. I don't have one, but I know that if you put the pin in the right spot in the rack and you put a plyo box behind their feet, you have one. Yeah. A leg press or a hack squat. You put a band on that thing and you drop the weight down. Well, you got somewhat of a plyo swing. You just find ways to make things work.
Yes. And one of the things that I recently bought was, I don't know if you've seen it, but like the bulletproof isolator. I bought that with the standalone stand. And so I'm waiting on like the longer arm to come in for it, but you can set it up and make it like it's a back attack, or you can make it like an inverse leg curl. You can mimic a lot of different machines in one because those machines are expensive, and I've been looking at different ones that I want, and all of a sudden they have this, and I see them emulating all this stuff. I'm like, well, I'm going to get this and give it a try. And right now, the kids love it for preacher curls. All my guys want to do preacher curls on it all the time. But it has given us. You can do like 4-way hip stuff. So we use it for hip flexion. The guys love to do the curls with, but it gave us a way to do some isolated leg work for like knee extension. So I think that's one good thing that is underrated too, especially people some tendonitis trouble getting some direct quad work like that. So it's for the price and the footprint of compared to all those machines. It was. I feel like it's been a great choice so far.
Yeah, there's so many tools out there, and evaluating what's the best for your space, how much room you have, how the flow works with it. It's not a matter of just throwing as much equipment in your gym as possible. You have to figure out what works.
Yeah, and on a busy day, is it going to be efficient for you to have that and have it programmed in there and for it to be used? Okay, or is it going to clog up the flow of your workout? I've seen too that you built your own flywheel, right?
I built what?
Your own flywheel, like your own
Yep.
like eccentric platform.
I actually built 2 of them. So I built a K-box for the ground, and I liked it. So I decided that a portable style K-box would be really good too, that I could mount on the rack. So I actually had ideas of mounting it where it would go from the rack to the reverse hyper and then turn the reverse hyper into a reverse K-box. I haven't gotten that far yet, but so yes, I built 2 of them actually.
Yeah, that's something I've thought about doing. I seen one on the marketplace a while back and had a good price, and I tried to buy it. I think it just never messaged me back for whatever reason. It was still just set for sale the last time I looked at it. But I know like Waffle Iron Jim. I don't know if you've spoken with him or called him any. He made his own, and something I thought about doing, but I haven't got around to making my own yet. But I definitely want one of those. That's another thing I got to try out at Birds, and I really enjoyed it and think would be a good addition.
So when I built mine, I got prints and I got them pretty cheap, but you can look on YouTube and figure it out. But I'm fortunate where I work, we have machinists. Well, they cut down some driver rod for me. I bought some pillow block bearings and cut some metal out for the flywheels, figured out what flywheels I wanted, threaded the end of the driver rod. Boom, man. I don't know, an hour and a half, I had that thing up and going. And it's pretty simple build. You just got to find the right rope. If you don't find the right rope, you'll snap that rope because you get to going so fast with it. So I got some heavier rope, and we've really been happy with it.
Yeah, I tried one when I was up there, and it really surprised me. Especially, I don't know if you've done this, but he held it like isometrically on me at the bottom and had me start pushing and then let it go. And man, I'll tell you what, if that thing hit at the top and pulled me back down, it really surprised me how strong that wheel was.
It'll jerk you back through that hole if you're not careful. Yes, I've held them in isometrics for so many seconds, let go, and then if you give that little flywheel a little bit of assistance when you let go, that thing will fly to the top. But when they hit the top, they better be ready to come back down.
Yeah, I feel like that's like a very good, valuable tool to have, especially teaching a kid to really be able to decelerate and re-accelerate.
Where I saw it really quickly was potentiating jumps. I could put them on that thing for 3 to 5 seconds, really get them pushing hard off that K-box, give them a couple minutes, and then put them on a vertical, and they would seem to do better.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. That's one of the main reasons that I really love those.
Well, if you decide you want to build one, hit me up. I'll tell you everything I know about building one. These turned out pretty good. I know the first shaft I had was the same size as my pillow block bearings. I didn't have it cut down, so I had to put the shaft in the freezer, and I had to put the pillow block bearings under heat. I got the back one on really quick, and it was good. But, man, getting that front one on was a sucker because that rod started warming up, and then I couldn't get it to where it would slide very well. So the next one I definitely had cut down, and it was simple. Well, Coach, I know you're not feeling well. You took time out of your evening. It's getting late out there to come on and have this long conversation, and I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. I've had a good time.
Well, thank you very much. And yeah, when you get to that K-Box stage, let me know and I'll help you all I can.
I definitely will. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Have a good evening.